This Week in Startups is brought to you by Audible.com, a leading provider of spoken audio information and entertainment. Listen to audiobooks whenever and wherever you want. Visit audible.com/twist for your free audiobook. Today, Jason talks with Steve Case, co-founder of America Online, about the internet revolution and innovation roadmap outlined in Steve's new book, The Third Wave, An Entrepreneur's Vision of the Future.
In those early days, we couldn't have entered the market without the partners, without having IBM and Apple and Commodore selling our services. We didn't have the money to do it on our own. But even in the later years, we had hundreds of partners. It was shifted from the PC companies to the network companies, to software companies, to content companies, to startups that we were funding. There are hundreds of companies that were part of the success of AOL. We would not have succeeded without those partnerships. So we moved away from being reliant on one or two to having hundreds of those partners. But I think that dynamic of partnership is going to be critical in this third wave. And I think the mindset of entrepreneurs who understand that of course the software is important, but figuring out a way to build the partnership, which requires building a relationship and building trust, is also going to be important. And that it's going to just require that additional extra effort to really take your idea and move it into the real world.
Hey everybody, welcome to This Week in Startups. I'm your host, Jason Calacanis, and today is an extremely, extremely special episode because my guest has been my inspiration and just played a seminal role without knowing it in my career as an entrepreneur. Steve Case is with us. He founded, of course, AOL, has been a tremendous thinker and investor and really laid the groundwork for the great companies that we have today, from Facebook to Twitter, Google. A lot of the first experiences that any of us had online happened on AOL, whether that was chatting with another human being, reading a news story, seeing a photo online for the first time. And in my childhood in the 80s, my first computer, IBM PC Junior, and then going on bulletin boards, finally getting a 1200, 2400 bar modem. And then AOL was the seminal changing point, I think, in how I looked at the world, Steve. When I would hear that sound, the
that modem sound,
and connecting, to me, that was like heroin, like crack. Like it made my whole brain change about the possibilities of the world. And then obviously I went on to sell two companies to AOL. I was part of the AOL greenhouse in the 90s, which we'll get into. And then I sold Weblogs Inc., which was my biggest success in life. Right. So having you on the program is just amazing. You have a new book out. It's called The Third Wave. Now, did you ever write a...
No.
Is this your first book?
First book.
So you must have been offered to write books all the time.
No, even 20 years ago, people would say, why don't you write a book about the early days of AOL, the early days of the internet? And I just wasn't that interested. I think in retrospect, it's because I've always been much more interested in the future, what's happening next, and not so interested in the past. And so a memoir wasn't of interest. So the coin dropped a couple of years ago, which led to this book, because I realized that the third wave was going to be different than the second wave, but have some similarities to the first wave. And so I could write a book about the future, laying out a kind of a roadmap of what I think will happen and how the playbook needs to change, and tell some of the stories from those early days, because Shakespeare said the past is prologue, and some of those lessons actually will be helpful to entrepreneurs in the third wave.
And what's amazing about it is, obviously, like when we were all coming up as entrepreneurs, this first wave of internet entrepreneurs in the 90s, we looked at you and Bill Gates and Steve Jobs, Mitch Kapor, just, there's a handful of you who actually built this stuff. And we just looked at you as the role models. What I didn't realize was what a brutal and hard journey it was to get AOL launched, and then how many near-death experiences AOL had. I mean, just the first version of AOL was kind of like a white label version where you built other people's online services?
Yeah, no, we started in 1985, so 31 years ago. At the time, only 3% of people were online, and they were only online an average 1 hour a week. So it was pretty early days, and we didn't have a lot of capital. We raised $1 million in our first round, and some of our competitors at the time, like Prodigy, were backed by IBM and Sears, and they said they're going to spend $1 billion. So we had to figure out some way to enter the market that wasn't sort of a direct kind of hand-to-hand combat with some big players, which led us to our strategy, essentially, this private label, white label service. So we partnered with Commodore and their Commodore 64 computer, create something called Q-Link. We partnered with Radio Shack to create something called PC Link. partnered with IBM to create Promenade, and we partnered with Apple to create Apple Inc. Personal Edition. And that's really was the focus for the first 5 years or so, just kind of creating those services. It was only about 1990 that we kind of pivoted and launched America Online as sort of our own brand.
So you basically spent 5 years getting paid by Apple, not under Steve Jobs, by IBM to Promenade, and you never had a direct-to-consumer brand up until that point. It was 5 years of just sort of having these customers who didn't get it and didn't have the clear vision that you had.
Well, they got enough to want to have us work together. And we created something that was custom for them, like the Q-Link service for Commodore had a little more game focus. The Promenade service for IBM had a little more education focus. But the reason we did it is because we didn't have the money to market. We didn't have the ability to launch on our own 2 feet. So we had to use these partnerships as a way to raise some capital from them that allowed us to continue to iterate our technology, our platform, and then launch these services. And then finally in 1990 kind of launch our own. But even that, as I tell in the book, it wasn't our plan to launch America Online. We were happy with these private label kind of services. It's Apple pulled the plug on us and decided they didn't want us to use the Apple brand name anymore. There was conflict about how we wanted to give away software for free. They wanted to sell it through Apple stores, things like that.
It was only through sheer force of will that you got Apple to actually give you their business. I mean, I should tell the story in the book. Apple didn't want to have this online service, and you basically weaseled your way in through the customer support department. Right. By just haranguing them over and over again, like, hey, dude, this will lower customer support.
Yeah, no, I was looking for we knew a partnership, it was probably 1987, 1988. We knew a partnership with Apple would be a big deal. They're a pretty important company at the time. It just launched Macintosh. And so I actually moved to San Francisco for 6 months, got an apartment here, and every day showed up at the Apple headquarters trying to figure out somebody I could talk to convince them to do something.
And you're like a 30-something-year-old at this time, right?
Even probably less than that. But yeah, maybe 28, 29, something like that. And so finally, the customer service department, we convinced that if they created an Apple-branded service, it would be a more efficient way for them to support their customers by getting people online to answer their questions from each other and not just call their telephone number and have customer service people on the phones. And we also said if we're going to create that, we can create a broader set of services that would help differentiate Apple. And maybe there's a reason people buy Apple, not IBM, because of this Apple Inc. Personal Edition service. But the core was finding a group, in that case, the customer service group, that really saw a benefit of doing something in the online world. It seems crazy now because even the reinvention of Apple in the last decade and the iPhone and the App Store and all that has really basically been around the internet, been around software, been around apps. But in those early days, in the late 1980s, most PC manufacturers, including Apple, viewed the online service world that we now think as the internet world as sort of something that was niche-y and more for computer hobbyists that wasn't going to be important, which is why it took us, I think it was 4 years to finally convince IBM to build a modem into a PC. Back then, they thought it was a peripheral that only a few people would want, so why put a modem in every PC? Because that would add a cost of goods for every PC.
$200 or $300 to put a Ventel or Hayes modem into these things.
Right. And they said, most people don't care, so we're not going to do that. But finally, when IBM was relaunching their consumer PC effort, they decided to build a modem in. And once IBM did, we were able to get Radio Shack and then other Packard Bell and other companies, and eventually Apple, and everybody suddenly built modems. And now, of course, it would be crazy to buy any kind of computing device, whether it be a computer or a phone or a tablet or anything that didn't have an online connection. But back then, most of the folks thought it was going to be pretty niche-y.
And the crazy part about that Apple deal is you get the 15th most important or 12th most important unit at Apple to give you this contract, and you get whatever number of years into it, and they call you up and just say, you know what, Steve, we're out.
Right. It was tough. We'd actually, when I finally was able to convince them to do this deal after my 6 months of kind of camping out every day, we thought it was a great deal. We raised some capital to launch the Apple service, and it was a priority of the company. But it was about a year into it, and we realized there was just channel conflict, and some of it was they regretted having licensed their brand name. I don't think they ever licensed the Apple name to anybody else ever since. They tightly control that brand name, but also debates about even the distribution strategy. As our strategy was to make it as easy as possible for people to try it. So we created this free trial disc, which we bundled with a lot of things. We gave away for free, gave away a free month to people. Apple didn't like that idea. They didn't like the idea of basically giving away software because their business model was selling software. They didn't like the idea of bundling it with magazines or sending it by direct mail because they wanted to push people into the Apple authorized stores. So we just had a lot of channel conflict, marketing, distribution, conflict, which ultimately led to Apple saying, we don't want to do this anymore. We want to tear up the contract. And so we negotiated a settlement of a few $1 million for us
got
to
$3 million out of
quietly go away. And then we used that money to relaunch Apple Inc. Personal Edition as America Online.
Which was originally Online America.
Right.
And you had the...
We had a little internal contest.
It didn't sound right to you.
It didn't sound right to me. Yeah. But I like the Online America idea or the America Online idea because we didn't have a lot of money to market. So having something that's sort of descriptive of what we were trying to accomplish, get America Online, I thought would
it's kind of the mission statement.
It was kind of the mission statement. And so I liked that aspect to it. But I thought America Online sounded better than Online America. And within a few weeks of launching, our members, because America Online was kind of a mouthful, started calling it either AO or AOL.
Right.
And technically, because online was one word, it should have been AO, but we decided AOL sounded better as well. So if it wasn't going to be called America Online, the nickname we wanted to embrace was AOL, and obviously that then took off.
And back then you raised $1 million for the company from Kleiner?
A mix of investors.
Yeah.
There was Kleiner was one of them. Allstate was another. Inco in Canada was another. Citigroup was. So it was a group of people. The initial round I think was about $1 million.
And when you raised $1 million back in the 80s, what percentage of the company did you give up? Because people don't remember back then. Venture capitalists were essentially, you were basically like a hired management team. The second you took their money, they just took all the equity.
Yeah, no,
it was brutal,
and also
right?
It's a little more complicated in our case because there had been sort of this predecessor company when I moved to D.C. in 1983. There was another company that was launched
CPC,
something.
CVC?
But it had a service called GameLine, and it raised tens of millions of dollars and crashed. And so the investors in that were basically looking at a kind of a wipeout. And so when we decided to relaunch with some of the core team as essentially what became AOL, the deal was essentially that they were still trying to earn back the money from the they just lost. So they ended up with the vast majority of the company. But that was okay because we believed in the idea and we wanted to move it forward. And eventually, I don't think I ever owned more than 3% of AOL. But when it got to be worth a lot of money, that 3% was a good amount.
All right. When we get back from this one and only commercial break, I want to talk a little bit about the transition to unlimited, because this created a huge national crisis. And this is really when the whole online world came online, was when AOL could not handle allowing everybody to go online instead of for $3 or $4 or $5 an hour, but for $20 an hour, unlimited, when we get back on This Week in Startups. Hey, everybody. I want to talk about one of my favorite addictions, Audible. I listen to audiobooks constantly because I love nonfiction, I love learning, and I'm big into bios. So my Audible Pick for this month, this week, whatever amount of time it's going to take you to listen to it, I think you listen to it in about a week, is The Man Who Knew Infinity, A Life of the Genius Ramanujan. And this book is amazing. It is about an Indian clerk who is a math genius and who filled 3 or 4 books with math theories and formulas that today inform how we interpret black holes, and a true genius who then went to England to study. And it is being made into a film, which I was lucky enough to just see. And it's got Jeremy Irons and Dave Patel in it. It is an amazing, and Stephen Fry, and just an all-star cast. And I just saw this movie, and it is very powerful and a great, great film. And, making math, interesting, very hard to do. And there's a lot of these people who did seminal, incredible work, and you would never know them. The book is by Robert Kangle, and I actually saw the author speak with the director recently at a screening. And I, immediately when I got invited to the screening, I said to myself, I'm going to go to screening for this book, but I want to go deeper. I always want to know not just the 90-minute or 120-minute version, but I like to read the original source material, and I like to listen to it. I'm constantly in the car. I'm driving between things. Sometimes I got to take my daughter to a kid's party, and then there's other parents there. I don't want to talk to them, so I pretend I'm on a conference call. Really, I'm listening to an Audible book while the kids are playing. The kids don't want to be involved with the parents, but the parents don't want to talk to me about some crazy nonsense, I just say, I got to go make a phone call. I secretly listen to a little bit of Audible. So go check out The Man Who Knew Infinity. It is an amazing audiobook, and it is going to get my highest recommendation. Of course, if you're not into bios, there are a ton of other interesting books. One I'm reading on my hikes through the NorCal mountains is Amusing Ourselves to Death by Neil Postman, who is I believe a New York University media kind of Marshall McLuhan type professor. And Amusing Ourselves to Death is my backup here. If you want to listen to an amazing book from 1985 about media and media theory and television versus the printed word in newspapers and before that books, and how illiterate and how television has become a huge nonsensical mess. We are actually amusing ourselves to death. If you look at what's happening in this election this year, this is a really interesting book to go back and listen to, especially. And the way I wound up wanting to listening to Amusing Ourselves to Death was I had Keith Raboy at the Launch Festival. You may have heard that episode here. And he just mentioned casually, like when I was asking about Donald Trump and Cruz and Hillary Clinton and Bernie Sanders, he said, it reminds me of this incredible book, Amusing Ourselves to Death. And I was like, I didn't read that. And this is one of the things I love about audiobooks is, sometimes you get older, you're 30 years old, you're 40 years old, you're 50 years old. You're supposed to have read some books. You're supposed to be an expert. Listen, I'm supposed to be an expert on media and technology. I never read Amusing Ourselves to Death. I may have read a chapter or two when I was younger on the book. And now I have Audible. I listen to it on my hikes. I go for a 2-hour hike. I knock out 2 out of the 7 hours. Boom, I got another hike, wipe out another 2 or 3 hours, go to the gym. I reward myself when I exercise with Audible. I reward myself when I'm driving with Audible. I like to make myself smarter. Thank you so much to our friends at Audible for supporting this episode. Get a free audiobook right now, like The Man Who Knew Infinity or Amusing Ourselves to Death. And you can just go to audible.com/twist, audible.com/twist. Some of my past recommendations, The Hobbit, read by Robert Inglis is amazing. My daughter and I love listening to that. We've listened to the first 3 chapters over and over again because she likes certain scenes, like when the dwarfs are singing and breaking plates. And then before that, I did Building Great Sentences because you guys know I sold my book and it will be on Audible at some point next year. And I wanted to write better sentences. So I got this Building Great Sentences, and it's really helped me do better sentences in my writing. And you can access your stuff from iPhones, iPad, Android, Windows, all that. What's really interesting is I have an iPad, I have my phone, and a lot of times I'll go from my iPad to my phone and it remembers where I was. So if you forget and my phone died on the hike, then I plugged in my iPad and I was listening on my deck, it remembered where I was and it caught me up when I was listening to Amusing Ourselves to Death. 180,000 titles in every genre, and they're doing some really interesting stuff with channels and podcasting. There's a bunch of stuff going on with Audible that you'll read about in the news. They're just an amazing company. I love it. Download my book of the week for free by signing up at audible.com/twist. You can only get that free book by going to audible.com/TWIST, and they love to see you do that. So make sure you tell your mom, your dad, your cousin, your brother, your sons, your daughters, your friends, your enemies. Tell them to go to audible.com/twist and get a free book. The Man Who Knew Infinity, a great, great listen. And Amusing Ourselves to Death, another great listen. Okay, let's get back to this amazing interview. Hey, everybody. Welcome back to This Week in Startups. I'm your host, Jason Calacanis. And today on the program, the legendary Steve Case, dealmaker, creator of AOL, investor. Now you do Revolution. You invest in tons of companies. You have the Case Foundation. You give away a ton of money and do a lot of good work in the world. But today we're talking about The Third Wave. You finally wrote a book. It's a great read, and it's also an amazing listen. And so if you have Audible, go download it right now. What's amazing is, and I respect this a lot, you actually read the book yourself.
No, it was fun to do it. It was good. I think when you go to the trouble of writing a book, you want to make sure that that people kind of it has the right passion to it, and you emphasize the right kind of thing. So I decided instead of having somebody read it for me, I'd just do it myself.
Yeah, and you know what? The passion comes through when you're reading it. Is it a little bit surreal for you? Because you're such a dogged entrepreneur. My perception of you is just like you're like this consummate deal maker, dogged entrepreneur, just never say die. To read your own story, is it just like a little weird, surreal to like go back to those 30 years? That so much happened.
No, a little bit, but at the same time, what we talked about before, what triggered the writing of the book was more kind of laying out a framework for the future. And
Right.
so most of the book is about what I think will happen next. But I did think including some stories of what happened and lessons learned from the things that worked, the things that didn't work, would be helpful for entrepreneurs as they think about this third wave and realize that the dynamics are going to be quite different than what we've seen in the last 10 or 15 years in what I call the second wave.
Yeah, and so let's just define those three waves. The first wave obviously was building the infrastructure of the internet, which I think you put AOL and Cisco and those kind
Cisco, but basically taking what was an idea and turning it into reality. So it's building the foundational technologies, the software, the servers, the networks, and getting everybody to be part of that. So it required a lot of partnerships. And then once you had the internet, then create the on-ramps, particularly for consumers, to get people connected to the internet, and then educate people why they should be connected, which we take for granted now. But in those early days, most people were pretty skeptical. So that really was the first wave, just building the internet. And the second wave, the last 15 years or so, has been building apps and services on top of the internet. So it's Facebook and Twitter and Waze and Snapchat, mostly about software, mostly about apps, and some huge, huge successes. Facebook, obviously, with 1.5 billion users. Google, of course.
So you guys almost bought Google. Is that true?
There was some discussions. We actually, when we did a deal with them early on, we bought 5% of Google, and then after the merger with Time Warner, we talked about some potential acquisitions. Google was one. Apple was actually another when they were still, kind of in the early stages of trying to kind of reposition the.
What stage did you buy that 5%? Because what happened was, if I remember correctly, Larry and Sergey, they wanted to have distribution to get people to actually do search. So they got Yahoo and AOL to make them the default provider. You provided them with a third of searches in the beginning?
It was a big deal for them, and it was a good, helpful deal for us. Our search got better, and we got the 5% at a pretty low price. It was, I think, a couple of years before Google went public. And so it worked for them and worked for us. We had better search and owned a stake in that company, and they had far broader distribution that then drove their use and their algorithm improving and so forth. And they likely would have been successful anyway, but it certainly accelerated the rise of Google.
And when did you almost buy Apple? Was that like when Steve was out, or when Steve went bankrupt?
This was after he went back in. We did the merger with Time Warner in 2000. So probably 2002, 2003. It was not at any time. We didn't engage with Apple on the discussions, but we internally, with the board at AOL Time Warner, talked about some potential strategic moves. I was teeing up some of these things. I mentioned some of the other options we considered in the book. But at the time, people were more focused on managing what was there, and there was some reluctance to consider any additional acquisitions, whether it be Google or Apple. So no, those discussions never really went anywhere. And
the third wave. So we have the first wave, obviously building out the infrastructure that gets us to whatever the end of the millennium, and then we have this great boom for the last 10, 15 years that everybody builds on the shoulders of yourself and Gates and Jobs. Kapor, everybody. Who else in that group do you really respect? That sort of your contemporaries, whether they were successful or not. Who do you just think were the brilliant minds and just the brilliant?
Well, I give a lot of credit to the founding team that really got the internet going in the first place in the 60s and 70s. DARPA funded it, and there were people like Larry Roberts and Vince Cerf and many others that were key parts of really standing up the internet. But it's worth remembering, we started in 1985. It was still illegal to connect a commercial service to the internet. It wasn't until 91 or 92 that it became legal for businesses and consumers to connect to the internet. But I do respect the people who put that basic framework in place to make it possible, and then all the entrepreneurs that helped make PCs part of everyday life, helped make the internet part of everyday life. So there really were dozens that were really critical to make. And that's one of the lessons I talk about in the book. In that first wave, nobody could do it on their own. It really required a tapestry of alliances. Everybody had to do their part to really take this idea and make it real. I think that dynamic is going to become more important again in the third wave.
Interesting. So first wave, we get the infrastructure done. Second wave, people like Larry and Sergey with Google, or Jerry Yang and David Filo with Yahoo, and obviously Zuckerberg was an AIM hacker.
Right.
I mean, Zuckerberg grew up on AOL, and in a way, when you look at what Facebook has done, the either brilliance or criticism of it is creating what they called AOL back in the early days, which was the walled garden. It's the entirety of the experience. When you watch Facebook, is it like, as Yogi Berra would say, deja vu all over again?
There's some, sure. No, and I think they've done a terrific job, obviously, building on some of the, as you know, with AOL, even the early days, we always believed that the killer app was people.
Right.
We called it community. Now people call it social networking or social apps. But we always focused on things like people connection, instant messaging, buddy lists. We thought that was really the core, really the soul of the medium was people, interaction, community. So that was always the majority of our use. So it doesn't surprise me, fast forwarding now 30 years, that Facebook and Twitter and Snapchat and things like that essentially are community social kind of apps and services, because I think that ties into something that's pretty fundamental about all of us. And Facebook has evolved some of the things that AOL did early on. Twitter even took the idea of AIM and status updates and creating persistency and an API to create a platform around it. So hats off to them. They've really taken some of these ideas to a whole nother level.
If you trace back a lot of these great, decacorns, $100 million companies, the AOL fingerprints are all over them. I remember talking to Evan when he was launching Twitter, which was an SMS service. He said, it's sort of like AIM. You know, in AIM, there's that drop down where you can set your status. You can be like a smiley face or this, emoticons. You guys were the first to have, like, I think, emoticons there. Or people would do :/ parentheses to get it, but same thing as emoticons. But that was Twitter, which was, hey, when people could look at their instant message list and see the status of the person.
Right.
It was the inspiration for Twitter.
Right. No, I understand.
It's crazy.
And I think that's really the path of innovation.
Yeah.
AOL went from nothing to the leader, and then in the first wave was the dominant company, and the second wave lost some altitude, and new innovators kind of taking a fresh look kind of rose. I think in the third wave you'll see that same dynamic. Some of the companies that are leaders now will get to new heights, and others will fall by the wayside to be replaced by a new generation of entrepreneurs, bringing a new perspective around some of these opportunities.
Let's talk about what the third wave is, because that's really what the book's about. I mean, for me, I'm geeking out just even having you here to talk about this movie of my life. To watch you do this for 20 years is really we all took notes watching you guys. But what is the third wave? How do you define it, and why is it important?
I think it's amazing to see the progress that we've made in the first wave and the second wave, and how it's changed communications and media in so many aspects of our lives. But really important aspects of our lives haven't changed that much.
Which ones?
Take healthcare, for example. The way it works for most people when they go to their doctor or go to the hospital is the same way it worked 10 years ago. When their kids go to school, the way they're learning in school is about the same way. Teachers are teaching generally the same way. Students are learning generally the same way. And there's opportunities now to take the internet to the next level and really integrate it in these real world kind of ways. So that healthcare should be more technology-based. When people are diagnosed with cancer, for example, MD Anderson says 25% of the time they reverse the first opinion. They were wrong. The data wasn't right. There's smarter ways to manage diseases like diabetes or conditions like diabetes. In schools, there's much smarter ways to have more personalized, adaptive approaches to learning that some schools are doing, but most aren't. And it's true in energy. It's true in transportation. Things like smart cities and driverless cars. They're starting to capture people's imagination. But these things will only work if the innovators realize it's not just about the software. It's not just about the app. It's how you take this software, take this technology, take this connectivity, and integrate it in everyday life, which will require partnering with some of the players, schools or hospitals, for example, and also require understanding the policy implications, because these sectors are regulated.
Right.
And that scares people. Oh, the government, it's going to slow things down, and there's some truth to that. But the reality is things like drug safety, things like food safety, things like drones flying in the sky or driverless cars driving on our streets, there's going to be some regulations associated. So the innovators in this third wave need to recognize the importance of partnerships. They need to recognize the importance of policy, and they also need to recognize that these are hard problems. These revolutions will happen in more evolutionary ways, so they're going to have more perseverance. Like in the book, I call these the 3 Ps: partnership, policy, and perseverance are going to define the third wave. And they were really important in the first wave, not so important in the second wave, but going to be important again in the third wave.
Because in the second wave, we kind of built our own little pond that we could all just do whatever we wanted. It was this little town online, the internet, this really weird aberration that, Surf and all these guys built, that was just like a little vacuum out there. We could just play in that little place. But now when you're Uber and you go out into the real world, or you're Elon Musk and Google with self-driving cars, I mean, you're on public roads. There are rules about how the roads operate, how cars operate, like having review mirrors. And
and the rules may need to change because some of the regulations don't make sense. But I think the key for the third wave to work is for the innovators to have a constructive dialogue with the policymakers, not ignore them, not wish the government would just go away, just recognize it's going to create some frustration because these are difficult issues. Even partnerships also are going to create some frustration. Like my case in that first wave of for 6 months every day going to see Apple until finally they agreed to do something. It's going to be different than just crafting an app, dropping in the App Store and hoping it's the next WhatsApp, hoping it's the next Snapchat. And some entrepreneurs won't want to do that. They'll say, I just rather focus on apps. I don't really want to have to deal with partners. I don't really want to have to deal with government. I don't want to persevere. I'd much rather have an overnight success. I don't want to slog at it for 5 or 10 years before I break through. But I think the real innovators are going to adopt this different mindset and this different playbook, learn from that first wave kind of experiences, and that mentality is going to lead them to build great companies in the third wave.
And when you look at the great companies that are starting to emerge in this third wave, I think you put probably like the Airbnbs, the Ubers. Who else do you put in that group? I guess Elon Musk and what he's doing at Tesla, obviously, and SpaceX. Who do you put in that third wave group? And what about the sort of disruption word and like sort of begging for forgiveness, breaking rules, reinterpreting legislation or rules that are in the books? I mean, Airbnb is kind of like, we don't consider this a hotel, therefore we're not responsible for hotel rules.
Yeah, I think there's always going to be that dynamic. There's always going to be that tension. And the entrepreneurs always should bring that sense of urgency and what about this and what about that, the sense of possibility challenging the status quo, whether it be an incumbent company or a existing kind of regulations. That kind of pressure on the system is healthy. But I think entrepreneurs will start realizing in the third wave, some of the regulations are kind of roadblocks. If you don't figure out a way to adopt them, it's not so much you can ask for, kind of forgiveness.
Theranos comes to mind.
Theranos comes to mind. 23andMe at one point for a year, they were basically put out of business because of some claims they were making. And in order to get driverless cars on streets, you're going to have to get somebody to approve it. You're going to have to make sure they're convinced them that they're safe and that they're going to be encrypted, so bad guys don't create problems. You're going to have to proactively get approval to enter some of these these third wave businesses. So, and even with Uber, they've learned this, because when they started, I think they really thought they were an app. They thought they were a marketplace. Now in our building in Washington, D.C., they have 2 floors. They've hired dozens, maybe even hundreds of people who are dealing with policy. And in some countries like Germany and South Korea, they're out of business. The countries have basically not allowed them. So in this country, they were able to win because it was lots of local battles. They'd win some, they'd lose some, but overall they were able to win. But in some countries, they were blocked from even entering the market, and that dynamic is going to become more important to understand in the third wave. So yes, it's good to enter the market in a clever way. Maybe there's some kind of workaround, but in some of these sectors, you're actually going to need to have more of a dive. Fintech, for example, you actually can't create a lending platform and lend people money. You can't create a crowdfunding platform, and particularly around equity or debt, unless you actually pass some tests. You kind of prove that you're kind of doing the right thing in the right way. Otherwise, you won't be allowed to generate any revenue, and that's a different dynamic in the third wave than we saw in the second wave.
The SEC does not seem to take lightly to people reinterpreting the rules, no matter how old they are, about accredited investors, non-accredited investors.
I agree, and you get in a lot of trouble, and then once you're in the penalty box, it's hard to get out of that penalty box. And so I think that's the dynamic. I understand a lot of people listening to this will say, I don't want to deal with the government. It's frustrating. I don't want to deal with it. And that's fine. You don't have to deal with it. But if you really want to revolutionize healthcare or education or food or energy or transportation or financial services, pretty important parts of our lives, pretty big sectors of the economy. Welcome to the third wave. It's going to require a different mindset, and some of that is going to be more engagement on policy.
Let's talk about the partnership piece of the puzzle in the third wave. You seem to be the master of getting these partnerships done, but are most partnerships destined to be transitional, in the sense that all the partnerships you did sort of laid the groundwork, they were great educations, but your great success came when you didn't have partners slowing you down, and AOL went directly to consumers?
Yes and no. Okay. Yes and no. I mean, we in those early days, we couldn't have entered the market without the partners, without having IBM and Apple and Commodore selling our services. We didn't have the money to do it on our own. But even in the later years, we had hundreds of partners. It was shifted from the PC companies to the network companies to software companies to content companies to startups that we were funding. There are hundreds hundreds of companies that were part of the success of AOL. We would not have succeeded without those partnerships. So we moved away from being reliant on one or two to having a hundreds of those partners. But I think that dynamic of partnership is going to be critical in this third wave. And I think the mindset of entrepreneurs who understand that of course the software is important, but figuring out a way to build the partnership, which requires building a relationship and building trust, is also going to be important. And that it's going to just require that additional extra effort to really take your idea and move it into the real world.
And AOL had this amazing period, I guess it was like 95 to 2000, where you defined a category. It was called portal deals. Mm-hmm. And because AOL had so many tens of millions of users, I mean, at the peak, you guys hit 30, 35 million.
Right, 30, I think.
Paying subscribers. And to get people's heads around this, at the time, I think HBO was probably the greatest subscription service out there, maybe 10 million people.
I think it might have been more than that, but they were getting
20?
less money per month because of the way it was working with the cable.
But nobody
system.
was bigger, right? Had anybody ever built a paid subscription service?
Yeah, at the time, I don't think so. Certainly in terms of the overall kind of revenues, both in terms of the subscription revenue and sort of the commerce and advertising revenues on top of it. Which is why when we went public in 1992 as the first internet company to go public, it was still a lot of skeptics. That roadshow was tough. People saying, well, why is this ever going to amount to anything? And the reality was we've been at it for 7 years and had 184,000 customers and $30 million of revenue. And the market value of the company was $70 million. We raised $10 million at a $70 million valuation.
It was huge, also known as an A round or a B round in Silicon Valley today.
That's changed. And then we started taking off. And then the next 8 years, we went from 184,000, I think it was 30 million, and from a 70 million value to $160 billion value. So the first decade almost was a struggle. The second decade was when we got the benefits of it. And I think that's going to be more the dynamic in this third wave.
It goes a little faster now. Everything's accelerated. Right. It seems like it's compressed. It's a good thing or a bad thing in your mind?
Well, I think it's a good thing that innovation is accelerating. I think it may slow down a bit in this third wave because some of these revolutions will happen in evolutionary ways, and you'll have fewer overnight successes, and it will require the partnerships to get traction, will require understanding the policy to get traction. So the mindset of entrepreneurs that if it doesn't work quickly in the first few months, then you should move on to something else. I think that's going to require a different mindset in the third wave. So the pace of technological change will continue to accelerate. The potential for innovation will continue to accelerate, but you're going to have to add on these additional dynamics around these 3 Ps I talk about, partnership, policy, and perseverance, to really be one of the winners in one of these third wave sectors.
You get pitched by a lot of entrepreneurs. You feel like they pivot too quick. Like they're a little bit weak compared to the entrepreneurs.
It depends what they're trying to do.
Yeah.
I mean, it depends what they're trying to do. Sometimes the ideas don't really work, and trying to do something else makes sense. And sometimes, as in case was AOL and many of the first wave companies, the idea was right. It just required patience. It required perseverance. And back when we think back of it, it's not that surprising to me. It took so long because of the time. It cost $10 an hour to be connected, so we had to get the networks down. You had to get this modem built in your PC, which was a hassle. So we had to get them built. Yeah. It just took a bunch of stuff to get the foundation for growth. I think that mentality will become important again in this third wave.
But those portal deals, my God, $50 million, $100 million. Who came up with the idea to do those portal deals for AOL, where you're like, we're going to sell AOL autos to one person, like either cars.com gets it or nobody does. And then people, forget this, you could go public. You could take your internet company and go public based on closing a deal with AOL. If you closed a deal with AOL, CD Now or whatever CD manufacturer, Amazon or Google, the AOL deal was the checkbox that got you to go public.
Yeah, I think at the time it was the startups were viewed as risky because there were a lot of people trying to do autos or trying to do anything. And so because AOL was the leader of the pack, about half of the internet traffic in the U.S. went through AOL. If you were able to get that deal with AOL, that basically said kind of a partnership deal that you can now break through and you'll reach a significant audience. So it de-risked it from an investor standpoint, even though they were giving us large amounts of money to get that commitment, get that exclusivity.
And the great part about that, I mean, you must be like a genius deal maker, I think. I think that might be like, you see the playing field, but you're very good at capitalizing, because not only did you get them to pay you to paint the fence I think was that Huck Finn who got them to paint the fence.
Right.
They paid you to paint the fence, and then you got equity in these companies, and then they went public, and AOL just kept cashing in $100 million, $500 million checks of people going public, whether it was Google or whoever along the way. Who came up with that architecture? Was that you?
It was a team. We had a lot of people doing different parts of it, and actually some of even those big anchor deals, some of the companies came to us to propose. They said, we would like to be the exclusive. How can we? What does it take to be able to essentially have that leadership position? But that's why AOL went from sort of an unknown IPO when we went public to being the best performing stock of the decade, because of the success of figuring out ways to drive up the audience and figure out ways to unlock new revenue streams.
The Ted Leonsis, you met him at some point, I guess through your brother.
Yeah, 1993, yeah.
Yeah, because your brother worked at Hambrick.
Yeah, he was at Hambrick DeQuist, and Ted's company at the time, Redgate, was in Vero Beach, Florida.
Yeah.
And it was a new media consulting company, multimedia development company. And they were looking at raising capital. And so I met with Ted, and basically we decided pretty quickly to merge our companies, and he moved about a year later from Florida up to D.C. and played a critical role in building AOL. And even today, now at Revolution, our investment company, he's a key partner with me in the Revolution growth side, which we're investing in not just the startups. We have Revolution Ventures investing in startups, and Revolution Growth investing in what we call speed ups. And Ted's been a great partner now for 25 years.
He played a key role in building the culture inside the company, but he also was he the architect of the CD-ROM distribution? No,
there was other people, Jan Brent and others who were focused on the marketing. Ted focused initially was running the day-to-day operations of the AOL brand, because we had multiple brands, and then launched the Greenhouse program, which was basically investing in dozens of companies that really we thought had great potential.
The Greenhouse was amazing, because I was actually part of the Greenhouse. This is 1993, I think, 94, 95, somewhere in that range.
Right.
You guys decide to essentially launch what could later be defined as a Y Combinator, which is you gave people $100,000 or $250,000 in Silicon Valley in New York, where I got my start, to build online experiences with the idea that you're making $3 an hour, so you just give them 50 cents off the top or something for every hour people were engaged with Total New York, which was which is John Borthwick's company. And now John is doing BetaWorks, which is essentially the Greenhouse.
Right. No, the idea Ted drove that was while we wanted to continue to work with all kinds of folks, we wanted to invest in the next generation of content companies and own some equity. And in exchange for owning some equity, we would help launch them by providing them distribution, something that worked well in the cable industry. Liberty Media, for example, basically leveraged the TCI basically cable infrastructure and launched a whole series of brands, including Turner and Discovery and others, because they said, we'll invest in your company and launch you on our cable platform. We essentially were trying to do the same thing with Greenhouse.
And the merger with Time Warner is that still like a fresh wound for you? Because it seemed like it's...
Yes and no.
Because people made... It was the peak of this era that AOL, which people thought was just an online company, bought Time Warner, which was the storied, like, amazing movie studio, magazines, everything. It just didn't make sense. Was this the pinnacle of your deal-making ability, and was it like almost like you were just too good at making deals that you got this close? What was the story of this merger?
No, I have a whole chapter in the book. I think there's some lessons. The core of it was we had seen this significant increase in our valuation. I think that 2 years before the merger, the value of the company was $20 billion. 2 years later, it was $160 billion. So there was some financial diversification, having a broader series of businesses. Time Warner, I think, had $30 billion of revenue, $10 billion of profit across a whole platform of a portfolio.
And you guys had what at that time?
$5 billion of revenue, maybe $1 billion of profit. Right. And so we were able to merge and have with 55% of the combined company. And so that's from a financial standpoint, it makes sense. But also from a strategic standpoint, it makes sense. We needed to path to broadband. They owned the largest cable systems. They needed a path to the digital future because they were struggling to figure out how
You negotiated a deal with $1 billion in profits with a company with $10 billion, and you wound up with 55%.
Right. It was the right
Explain.
deal. It was the right deal for us, and I think it was the right deal for
Clearly
them.
the right deal for the person who got 55%.
The lesson, though, and I talk about in the book, is that the idea of the merger, and even the things we talked about when we announced the merger, like digital music, this is years before Apple launched the iPod, and some of the things with Netflix and YouTube were things that this company could have done, but it was unable to get organized to do it. And it's ultimately about people and culture and execution. And I cite in the book a Thomas Edison quote, "Vision without execution is hallucination."
Right.
That sort of summarizes the merger for me.
Yeah.
I think it was a good idea. It was certainly good for our shareholders. It would have been good for Time Warner shareholders as well if we'd been able to execute against that and take what was the leading company in the internet and the leading company in the media, cable, telecommunications world and really together invent the
It was
future.
the right idea. It was a great set of assets. Why were you not put in charge of all this? This was, to me, when I was in my 20s and I watched this whole thing go down, and I was like, Steve Case is going to be in charge of everything. Like, you at that point were the most powerful executive on the planet, but they put Jerry Levine in charge of this. And I said, this guy doesn't know this world. This guy's not a visionary. Who is this guy? Well, how did he wind up in charge and not you?
Well, the simple answer is when I proposed the merger, I offered to step aside as CEO because I believed that it would be hard enough to get this deal done for the reason you mentioned, but it would be impossible if I was proposing that I take over the company. So on day one, in the first 30 seconds of talking to him about the potential merger, I said, if you agree to have a discussion about merging your companies, I would agree to step aside as CEO so you could run the combined company. The deal wouldn't have happened without that. And so it was a critical ingredient. I believed it was the right thing for AOL shareholders, so was willing to do that.
It had to be the right thing for AOL shareholders because what people forget is you guys had this tremendous run, but then broadband came out. And let's face it, you did not have the broadband assets.
Right. We did not have the broadband. And we even tried on the policy side to create sort of a dynamic around open access. The phone companies were required to open up their networks for narrowband dial-up. The cable companies were not. And so there was a real risk that AOL would kind of hit the wall as the transition to broadband happened. So there was a whole host of reasons why the merger made sense, which is why I agreed to step aside to facilitate the merger.
When you're watching it, though, in those years after, I think you have enough time that you can talk about it now without... Is it emotionally hard for you to reconcile it?
Not really. It's disappointing. No. It's frustrating. But I'm much more focused on the future. Much more focused on what we're doing now at Revolution. Much
I'd be
more
so
focused
bitter.
on the. No,
I would be so bitter, Steve. I would sit there and I would like break things because it was so perfectly teed up to be the company of the future. Was there like years of therapy or just you having to like take long walks on the beach to figure out why this thing collapsed and you weren't in charge? Be honest.
Not really. No, because I stepped aside 15 years ago, something like that. And most of the last 15 years I've been investing through Revolution. And now nearly 100 entrepreneurs in a variety of sectors.
Yeah,
one of the things I'm most enthusiastic about, and I devoted a chapter of the book, is this rise of the rest phenomenon. It's odd sitting here in San Francisco to talk about this, but I think the next wave of entrepreneurship is not going to just be in San Francisco and not just in New York and not just in Boston. It's going to be all over the country. And there's already some evidence of that. And that's been our focus, is backing these cities and backing these entrepreneurs and trying to lift up entrepreneurship. So to me, it's not about relitigating the past. It's about kind of leaning into the future and trying to be positioned for the third wave, including with Revolution.
Yeah, you're a shark in that way. You don't look backwards. You got to keep moving forward.
Move forward.
But my God, I have to keep going back to it for a little bit. If you had
maybe you need the therapy.
I do over this. I do. You know why? Because I feel like for a lot of us, we were so vested in this like story of convergence.
Right.
We all knew it was the right idea. And it was almost like this great story being told with AOL, and Time Warner. And it was like, yes, somebody got there. They got the online asset and they got the brilliant Ted Leonsis, Steve Case. And now you finally have the music assets. You finally have the movie assets. You got the cable channels. You got the things. It's going to work. And it would have been Netflix and Napster and Facebook combined, a company for the ages.
Correct. And that's part of the reason I wrote the book, because the lesson around this innovation is not just applicable to what we were doing there or what other companies are doing now. It's in healthcare, in education, in food, in transportation. The leaders won't continue to lead unless they lean into the future, and unless they figure out how to create the right culture internally so people really are focused on what's happening next. What happens as companies get larger is they shift from being the attacker to being the defender. Instead of imagining what's possible, they're more focused on protecting the downside. That happened as they all got larger, certainly happened after we merged with Time Warner. So what could have been great ended up not being. And part of that is, to me, the takeaway from that is it is about people. It is about culture. It is about execution, not just about vision, not just about opportunity. And that is going to be more challenging in this third wave because of some of the dynamics we've talked about. But the people get that right, whether it be the big companies who could get even bigger, not lose their way, or the small companies who could be the next giants. At the beginning of the second wave, as you said earlier, Facebook didn't exist. Twitter didn't exist. YouTube didn't exist. The iPod didn't exist. These things all were created in the second wave. There'll be a whole host of new innovators bringing fresh perspectives in the third wave and revolutionizing important aspects of our lives. But it's going to require this different mindset, more like the first wave mindset, less like the second wave mindset.
Do you miss being the operator? Do you miss being the guy?
I don't.
You don't?
I really don't. I get asked that a lot. No, I don't. I had a great run. I enjoyed it. It was a lot of fun, and I learned a lot. But it's also fun to be backing the next generation of entrepreneurs across a lot of sectors. We invested in a lot of different sectors in a lot of different places, and to me, that's a lot of fun as well. Trying to do what we can to take these ideas and work with these entrepreneurs and really give them lift, and also partnering more and more with investors in Silicon Valley and other places who understand this third wave is different and understand that some of the companies will not be here, but they'll be in these rise the rest areas around the country. Understand policy is more important. The fact that we're sitting in Washington, D.C. and have a team that really understands the policy aspect of things, I think positions Revolution to really be where the puck is going, and that's a lot of fun. So in some ways, Revolution is my new startup. We've been working on it for a decade, and I hope a decade from now, it's viewed as the
you've invested in a ton of great companies and made a ton of money, but you had money. It's in a way you kind of pulled a Jordan, like you hit that like last shot that he hit versus Utah, whatever it was, and you walked off. You did the greatest merger of all time. You went out at the peak. I guess it's okay.
No, it was more than okay. It's a great, but instead of
is there a company you would actually go run if there's somebody you get CEO offers? Do people come to you and say like, hey, you want to come run this company?
I do, but no, I'm running a company. It's called Revolution, and it's a company investing in lots of companies in a lot of places and a lot of sectors.
Is there a company you would run? Like if Steve Jobs had said, hey, and when Steve Jobs left, if Tim Cook said, listen, I could run this for a year, but I really need you, Steve. No. You want to come run Apple?
No.
You'd say no.
No.
You'd say no to running Apple.
First of all, Tim is doing a great job, and but no,
there's nothing that would get you off the bench to actually be an operator again.
Correct.
Wow.
Well, I think of myself as an operator because I think of myself both in terms of running Revolution and some of what we're doing that is different than other firms, both in terms of the places we invest and also the expertise we provide around partnerships and policy. I think that's interesting. I spent a lot of time on policy, particularly in D.C., trying to make sure we've got the right policies, such as the Jobs Act that I worked on a few years ago, legalizing crowdfunding, and how can we make sure we continue to win the global battle for talent. Things like immigration. I spent time on the Case Foundation, which my wife runs. We're involved in some issues around impact investing, inclusive entrepreneurship. I'm passionate about those things. So I have a great portfolio of activities that's a lot of fun.
It's kind of legacy now, right? I mean, when you look at it, you want to wake up every day and do something you love. And do you think about your legacy?
Not really. I think I've had a great career, a great run. Hopefully the next 10 or 20 years will have impact in a lot of different ways. But no, I'm more focused on what I'm doing now and particularly what I'm going to do next. And that's why I finally decided after 57 years to actually write a book, because I realized as you said when you listened to it, I guess, was there's some of the stories about the past, but it's mostly about the manifesto
future,
for the future, a playbook for the future.
So what drove you to be an entrepreneur? I mean, what is interesting, you talk a lot in the book about your brother, and you grew up in Hawaii.
Right.
And you just knew, the two of you were just entrepreneurial from the get.
Yeah, no, I relatively young.
Why was that? Were your parents entrepreneurs? What did your parents do?
My dad was a lawyer. My mom was a teacher, so they were not particularly entrepreneurial. There's something about, like I think everybody's an entrepreneur. Something about creating new things, imagining new possibilities, making money. There are a bunch of different dynamics, and it's always been important. But also, as I mentioned in the beginning of the book, when I was a senior in college in 1980, I read a book called The Third Wave by Alvin Toffler.
Right.
And it really inspired me, kind of mesmerized me, and that set me on the path that I've been on for pretty much now the last 4 decades.
Version of the third wave?
His version was basically the first wave was the agriculture revolution.
Sure.
The second wave was the industrial revolution. The third wave was the technology, digital revolution. And he talked back then, now 36 years ago, about the notion of electronic cottage and people getting information in new ways and connecting with people in new ways. And I just knew he was right. And so that set me on
When did that book come out?
I'm sorry?
When did that book come out?
1980.
1980. Wow.
So, and it took me 5 years. We didn't start AOL till 1985. So I worked for some big companies for a few years because back then there weren't internet companies to join.
You worked for a pizza company.
Pizza Hut and Procter & Gamble. And I learned some things at each of those companies and finally figured out a way to get into the startup world.
Pizza Hut, you were in charge of new pizzas.
Yeah, it's a pretty good gig, huh? I traveled around the country eating pizza, and they paid me to do it.
And PG&E, you were in charge of what?
P&G was basically new products, and it was like they're in Cincinnati and a great packaged goods company. And actually, one of the things they do really well is when they come up with a product, figure out a way to get people to try it. What's called sampling, and that inspired some of the AOL free trial disc kind of thing. So I think I got some great lessons at both companies.
You were like you guys were the original growth hackers in a way because you found something that worked, which was sending the floppy disk and then eventually the CD-ROM, and you pounded it until it didn't work anymore. Well, you probably kept pounding it even if it stopped working in a way.
No, well, early on we knew if we made the internet easier to use, more useful, more fun, more affordable, that would be the path taken off. Part of that was making it easy to try. So we wanted to give away the software, wanted to give away it first month. The challenge in the early days was when it was still on a floppy disk, it required 2 floppy disks. And the cost of a floppy disk, 2 floppy disks was high. So then we were able to get it onto one disk. And then with the CD, we were able to get it on even lower cost. And that's when we really could accelerate the marketing distribution strategies around that free trial disk. And
you created an affiliate program too, right? People who, that's another massive, I think, innovation, which now there's a whole affiliate is just baked into every business, which is you pop in a floppy, if you provide me with a customer, I give you a spiff.
Right.
I mean, it's pretty interesting. What was the impact of your brother's death on you? I mean,
it was hard. Very hard. No, he was a great guy. He was 44, I think. And a great investment banker. He was a close friend of Steve Jobs on the board of Next and took Electronic Arts public and Genentech public and a bunch of great companies. So he really was quite iconic, still is to this day here in San Francisco. Brain cancer. I'll run into people almost every week that will tell me stories about Dan and the impact he had on their lives.
He was a big figure.
A huge figure.
How does that inform your sort of, or is there a motivation for you with healthcare specifically? As personal?
Sure. That's one of them. And also, I don't take life for granted. It was a case where, one day he woke up and was told he didn't have much time to live. So you can't take anything for granted. And it's also why I care so much about what's happening next and trying to kind of make sure that one of the things we're focused on at the Case Foundation is leveling the playing field. So, just as the internet created a kind of a level playing field so everybody had access to information, we want to make sure we level the playing field in terms of opportunity. So everybody has the opportunity to be an entrepreneur, irrespective of where they happen to be or irrespective of their backgrounds or whether men or women or color of their skin. We want everybody to have that opportunity. So some of those are some of the passions we have, and I think that's inspired in part by his life and the impact he had, and then losing him.
The entrepreneurship is available to everybody. It's the lowest cost of entry now to build a company. So am I right in saying that it's never been a more level playing field? But at the same time, people feel left out of this revolution in the country.
Well, they are left out. No, the data is not helpful here. You're right at one level that it's easier and cheaper to start companies. The bar has been lowered. But last year, about 90% of venture capital went to men, 10% to women, which does not reflect the distribution of ideas. Last year, 75% of venture capital went to California, New York, and Massachusetts. The other 25% was split around 47 states. So that if you're, in San Francisco as we are now, you have an advantage versus if you're in Kansas City or St. Louis, or if you're a man, you have an advantage versus a woman. And that has to change. We need to make sure that if you have an idea, you have a shot. Now, some of those ideas won't work, but at least everybody should have a shot. And that's one of the big pushes we have around what we call inclusive entrepreneurship. And it's another big push is impact investing. And I have a chapter on the book. It's how do you create companies? Of course, they're focused on profit, but also focused on purpose. And there's a generation that is emerging that really cares about working for and doing business with companies that do stand for something greater. They do focus on
this
purpose.
Millennial generation.
Absolutely.
They get derided a little bit about being maybe not as gritty as, say, your generation or mine. I think you're a boomer, I'm a Gen Xer,
Right.
but this millennial generation, they lack grit in some ways. There's some entitlement, perhaps, but they also have this thing in their mind where they really think that it's their job to make the world better
I think that's
than
right.
they left it. It's really kind of
I think that's great. And I think some of the folks I've talked to, including in some of these rise to rest cities, including people focused on impact investing, are gritty. They are taking on some tough challenges. Not the easy app world. It's
Right.
how do you really change food systems in Detroit, or how do you really change how classrooms work in New Orleans? It's hard, and they're taking on some of these hard problems, and they are trying to build companies that do have this broader purpose, do have this broader impact. So I'm very bullish. I mean, I think that there's a lot of things a lot of things happen in the first and second wave we can be proud of, but there are a lot more that can happen in the third wave, and it's going to require this different mindset, including from young people that bring this new perspective, this new urgency, this new passion.
I want to wrap up because I know you got a lot to do, and this has been amazing. Thanks for coming.
Well,
I
thanks,
literally
man.
talked to you for 3 hours, dude. It's just surreal for me to be sitting here talking to just a legend. And you look at the political system today, and are you particularly happy with what we're seeing at this time in 2016 in the presidential election?
No.
Do you look at it and say, my God, this country is a disaster, this political system is a disaster? How bad is this?
It's pretty bad. No, I wouldn't call it a disaster, but
You wouldn't call it a disaster?
It's just a little hot language for my taste. But
Okay,
I would
what
say
would
it's
you call it? How do you
broken.
describe
I think
this?
I have a chapter in the book about the need to disrupt government and take a fresh approach to government, so it is more agile, is more flexible, is more focused in the future, focused on unleashing things, not just protecting against things. And clearly, it's gotten super partisan, and there's we're seeing a hollowing out of the political center, and that is troubling. And this election has been particularly noisy, and a lot of different things have been said. But hopefully, irrespective of who the next president is and who controls the Congress, people will be able to come together and deal with some of these third wave issues. Because if we don't get the regulations right, we're going to lose our lead. If we don't get immigration right, we're going to lose our lead. If we don't get the investment incentives right, we're going to lose our lead. And so I remind people in Washington that 250 years ago, America itself was a startup.
Yeah.
It was just an idea. And now we're the leader of the free world. And it's, if we get cocky and complacent, we'll lose that edge. We'll lose our way. We've seen this even in terms of the rise and fall of cities. 75 years ago, when Silicon Valley were apple orchards, Detroit was the hottest city because the car was the hot technology. It was growing like crazy, but then got complacent and kind of lost its entrepreneurial mojo, lost 60% of its population in the last 50 years, and then went bankrupt.
Yeah.
So that's an example. So as a nation, we need to make sure we don't get
That
complacent.
could be the whole nation. In a way. And are people so disenfranchised now that candidates like Trump, Cruz, even Bernie Sanders, I don't know what your thoughts are on him, it just doesn't seem qualified. But people seem to be voting no to the entire system. Is this the collapse of the Republican Party, the collapse of the two-party system that we're witnessing? Is a slow motion train wreck of just
It's hard to say. I mean, and I actually stay out of politics. I try to focus on policy and work in a kind of
What's the
quiet,
difference?
nonpartisan. The difference is politics. I don't endorse candidates. I'm not a big donor to candidates. I'm basically saying whoever wins, I want to work with to try to make sure the policies are right to support this third wave, to support innovation.
So that's why you worked on the Jobs Act.
And I did the Jobs Act with the support of the president and the White House, but also working with Eric Cantor, then the majority leader on the Republican side. And that would not have happened unless people came together. And that was, again, goes back to some of the things I talked about in the book, including the lesson from the merger with Time Warner. It wasn't about the idea. It was about the execution of the idea because people didn't come together. And so the initiatives that I work on now, it's not so much saying, here's what needs to happen. That's the easy part. It's figuring out how to get it to happen, which is mostly getting people to understand what the issues are and come together and figure out the right way to move forward.
Why do these corporations work in sync so well, and then the government is so dysfunctional and doesn't get stuff done? Or am I wrong that it doesn't get enough
Well, it
done?
gets a lot of stuff done. I think there's sort of always going to be opportunities for improvement and some things that are done that are stupid, but it does a lot of things that are important. And I think as a society, even though we might rail against the government and say we wish that this wouldn't happen or that didn't happen, there's also things that we do that we appreciate that the government does, and it's going to be true also in the third wave. How do you make sure, for example, as there's innovation in healthcare, it's done in a way that helps all? How do you make sure that privacy is protected? How do you make sure driverless cars actually work in a way that's safe and improves the city, doesn't create kind of havoc? So there's going to be a role of government. So I'm in the camp of it may be frustrating, particularly in this third way where there's more engagement with government. Maybe frustrating where there's more engagement with partners, but that's going to be critical to really move us forward in the right kind of way.
All right, let me just put it to you point blank. You got a couple decades left. Are you going to ever run for president or be in politics? I mean, we're looking at a candidate who has a fraction of the business success you have, none of the statesman-like behavior, none of the vision, none of the ability to get people to work together. And he's the leading candidate, and he's going to win, it looks like. I mean, it's a pretty disturbing state of America that a reality TV star can win. And you're sitting here, you've done some of the greatest things in business in the last couple of decades. Why would you not go in there and try to help?
Well,
I mean, Bloomberg did. Why wouldn't you go actually be in politics, run for office? Why wouldn't you do that,
I respect
Steve?
people do, including Bloomberg and many others. For me, I think the portfolio I have, led by Revolution, Case Foundation, and being this kind of behind-the-scenes kind of bridge builder on policy is a great portfolio. Keeps me pretty busy, and I do feel like I'm having. I know it keeps you busy,
but don't you have a moral obligation?
I'm doing my part. What are you doing? What are you doing to make the country better?
I'm not qualified, Steve. You are.
I appreciate that. You're very kind, but no,
you're qualified. You're 57. You're young.
I like my portfolio, and I want to be a try. And I worked with President Clinton. I worked with President Bush, and now work with President Obama. I'll work with whoever the next president is. Hopefully.
Would you take a cabinet position if somebody won? Let's say eventually,
I'm focused on what I'm doing.
If that would be a pretty amazing thing. I mean, you would be a great cabinet member.
Well, you're very kind, but I think at this point
you're in DC.
We need to end this interview because I don't like the direction it's going.
You don't like me convincing you?
I think we should be instead focusing on
this book.
Selling books. That's
well, listen. The only reason I say this is I have a theory. Right now, which is if you look at what this country needs, it's entrepreneurship. It's out-of-the-box thinking. It's being able to lead. And the politicians, we've all grown these amazing businesses. That was the huge opportunity. But we did such a good job building these businesses. Capital markets so efficient. Business is growing so well. The fact that this little tiny country with 300 million people has all of the global businesses out there, and there's very few truly global businesses that operate outside of their borders that are not American. It's very few.
No, that's not true. But
we went down the list of the top 10 internet companies. I mean, how many come out of America on a per capita basis?
My guess in the third wave, you'll see both regional entrepreneurs within the country and global entrepreneurs are playing much bigger roles. So I agree America is well positioned. I agree can remain
successful.
The most innovative entrepreneur nation, but I wouldn't get complacent. I wouldn't get cocky because there is.
Well, that's what I'm saying. Is the government doesn't. If we don't get the government situation worked out, can we actually maintain this run?
Sounds like you need to run.
Can we maintain the run, though? Do you think?
I think we can maintain the run, but it's going to be a challenge.
We got to get the government dialed in.
We got to get the government dialed in, but we also need to get the folks in places like this place to focus on these issues and engage with the government, not just complain about it, not just admire the problem, jump in and fix the problem.
Megan Smith, who, by the way, Megan Smith was part of the Greenhouse.
She was part of the Greenhouse.
With Planet Out, which was the first LGBT.
Probably 25 years ago.
You guys backed that.
We did back that.
You took heat for that, didn't you? At that time, a little bit of heat for backing a gay enterprise in the 90s, late 80s, early 90s, whenever that happened, early 90s.
Right thing to do.
Right thing to do. All right, listen. Everybody buy the book. I'm saying it right now. Steve Cash for president, honestly. No, seriously. I mean, it's like you, Sheryl Sandberg, Mike Bloomberg. You just look at this cohort.
I like the Sandberg-Bloomberg suggestions. I would continue to promote those.
I like the Sandberg case. Well, I think she would be a great president or a vice president. You would be a great vice president. I don't know. That's a pretty powerful Bloomberg said he wouldn't do it. Did you ever talk?
Are you ending this interview?
I'm kind of
winding it down here. Let's cut.
What about the... Why did you talk to Mike Bloomberg about running? Did you give him a push and say, "Hey, Mike"?
I talked about it, but I'm not going to say what I said. But I do know Mike. I have great respect for him.
That would have been so great if he ran, wouldn't have been? You would have loved it. He would have been the best candidate. Why didn't he do it? Do you think?
I don't think he saw a path to win.
He didn't see a path.
I think he said early on that depending on how things shaked up on both the Republican and Democrat side, he was open to it. But he concluded, it sounds like a couple months ago, that there wasn't a path to victory. And so he said, I'm not going to do something unless I think it's going to work. And I don't think it's going to work. So I'll
Are you publicly part of either party?
No.
So you're not publicly part of either party. You're an independent.
I'm independent.
Independent. But you would vote for Hillary, obviously, if you had a choice, Hillary versus Donald.
I will not talk about politics. I'll focus on policy.
I
will work, which was never the next president.
Listen, sorry I have to go there because you know what? You've been a hero to me all these years as an entrepreneur, just watching you do it. And it's really just amazing the groundwork that you and your contemporaries laid for us to, we stand on the shoulders of giants and you're one of those giants. And the book is tremendous. I really recommend getting the audio book because you read it, which is just always, you can tell, it's always a tell for me if the author reads their own book, if they really are proud of the book. And it's a book that's really, it's important reading if you're going to build businesses in the future. I'm sitting here geeking out about the history of all this because I got to witness it. But the book, in fairness, is really about it's what you've learned and what people should do going forward. So everybody go get the book. And thank you so much, Steve Case, for being on the program.
Appreciate it.